Good evening and welcome to Season 9, Episode 1 of Inside the Rookery, where we are once more joined by feathered friend James Wallis to talk about Big Table, building a game trade association for the UK and Ireland. Welcome to the stream, James, and welcome back to all our viewers after our seasonal break.
Hello, Corvids. It's a pleasure to be back.
It has been so long. I can already see some people in the chat, some of whom I know got a little patron present before Christmas. So if you're in the chat, yours hasn't arrived yet, I can only apologise for the post. I'm sure it will be with you soon. I did promise, I think, to almost everyone I sent a card to see them live in 25 in the comments. So great to see some people here already. Right, James, welcome back. What have you been up to since last we met?
Oh, good Lord. I can't remember how long ago that was. A year and something. I've written some stuff. I've done some stuff. I continue to do the podcast Ludo Narrative Dissidents, in which I, Ross Payton and Greg Stolze dissect role-playing games from a designer's point of view and work out how they work and why sometimes they don't. But mostly for the last 6 months or so, actually for the last year and possibly even more than that, since I left Asmodee, I think I've been looking around at the UK and Irish industry and going, we don't talk to each other, we don't learn from each other. There are holes in this platform, staircase, whatever it is, that we've got so used to stepping over that we don't realize they're there anymore. It's about time we had a trade association. The thing is, I left Asmodee partly because I had long COVID, which was affecting my recall and my focus, which has got a bit better. But for a long time, I was having meetings with people going, we really need a trade association. I'm probably not the person to run it. And waiting for somebody to go, sounds like a great idea. Who do you think we should get? Didn't happen. But it was about UK Games Expo last year that I finally went, no, actually, I think I'm better enough that I could do this, and nobody else is going to if I don't. So I've bitten the bullet. I am setting up Big Table, the British and Irish games trade. It was going to be Assembly, which was the kind of bit on the end of the acronym Big Table, but is now Association because it just sounds better. But it's a trade body. It will be an organisation for companies working within the games industry. That's not just games publishers and designers, that's also manufacturers, distributors, retailers, but anyone doing anything else, like podcasts, like running events, like running games cafes and things like that. The whole gamut. If you're working in the industry, if you're running a business to do it, Big Table wants to have services that it can offer you. And that's really it. There are equivalent organizations in other countries. There's the UEJ in France, which is it's jeu backwards. It's very clever. There's a smaller one in Germany that appears to be mostly a dining society. There's an equivalent Scandinavian group who I failed to have a meeting with at Essenspiel in October. And there's GAMA in the States. GAMA is the well-known one, the Games Manufacturers Association, which has been around for donkey's years and runs the GAMA trade show, the big trade show for the specialist games hobby. And they've been casting envious eyes over to the UK for some time. They do a good job. They don't do a great job. And I don't think they do a great job for the UK because the UK and Ireland have very specific, particular problems at the moment, not least the fact that we're not in Europe. I mean, we're in Europe, but we're not in the EU. Ireland obviously is, but then has the sea freight problems. It is not geographically connected. There's all kind of problems there. And some of these have come up recently with the recent safety legislation that came in at the end of last year that took the industry completely by surprise. And a number of smaller publishers just threw up their hands and went, we cannot deal with this paperwork. We're going to stop shipping our product to Europe, which is an incredible shame. And also an incredible shame that I didn't set this thing up 6 months earlier to be ready to have documents. Because one of the advantages of people say, well, why do we need a trade body? Because in a situation like this, rather than every single company going to their local trade specialist or EU law specialist or whatever it is and getting advice which is often quite different to what your competitor companies have got, a trade body can simply go to the industry specialist, and will have the budget to do it, go to an industry specialist, the best of the breed, get them to compile a report, and then make that report available to all our members, saving the industry as a whole tens of thousands of pounds, and making sure that everyone's singing from the same and hopefully correct spreadsheet. That's the plan. There's another thing coming down the pike. There's some sustainability guidelines that the EU's supposedly bringing in the next year or 18 months. I think they're going to cause just as much havoc. Again, it's all about labeling. It's about proving where the paper, particularly used in your products, has come from. That's going to be a nightmare for small publishers. But it's quite possible that there are ways around it, and there are ways of not being as big a problem as it seems if you don't know. So that's one of the reasons why we need a trade body. The other reason is we simply don't talk to each other. Together for basically 3 days a year in the bar at the Hilton Hotel after UK Games Expo, drinking £10 pints of beer, knackered from having been selling games or talking about games to the general public for most of the day. It is not a great place to talk about policy and business policy in the big picture. But, as an industry, from my calculations, we're pushing a turnover of around £750 million a year. Much which is Games Workshop, I have to say. But at the same time, and then you've got Asmodee and you've got Hasbro in the UK. But £750 million is far from chicken feed. And at the same time, is the industry growing or shrinking? I can't tell you. I don't know anyone who can tell you, because so far as I know, nobody is compiling that data. What was the best-selling game last year? Best-selling hobby game? Best-selling RPG in the UK and Ireland? I can't tell you. I don't know anyone who has that information. We should know week by week what the best-selling games are, and it shouldn't be impossible to do that. I've been talking to a lot of people. UKI, which is the equivalent trade body for the video games industry, the UK Interactive Entertainment thing, and they compile the weekly best-selling video games lists. And so I said, well, how do you do that? How do you go about compiling that? And I was there. Well, a few years ago, we bought the company that makes the EPOS that all the shops use. And it's okay. I think that may be out of our reach for a while. UKI is huge. They have about 15, 18 full-time members of staff. Top whack to join UKI. It's based on company turnover, but the top whack, it's £88,000 a year to join UKI. That buys you a seat on the board, but still £88,000 plus VAT.
Yeah, that tells you the difference in scale between the video games industry and the tabletop games industry. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask about that synthesis between video game industry and tabletop gaming industry. Because what I have found anecdotally, obviously this is not backed up by evidence, and in my day job I lead a data analytics and data science and behavioral science team, so I'm all about evidence. But anecdotally, I've noticed a massive rise in the last few years when I talk about, Rookery publications and what we're doing creatively, and when I talk about what my young people are doing at university in games design and production at Abertay. Such an uptick in interest from people, where before you would have to genuinely explain what a tabletop game was, what D&D, relate it back to D&D. Now you get, oh, that's amazing, that's really cool, I've heard Abertay's the center of that, and I've heard about, now as a family we're starting to play these kind of games. We played this one, we played some kind of, I would call them sort of fun entry party games, but are way more complicated tabletop games than they used to be. So for me, it's kind of a perfect time for something like this to be launched, because I feel like for the UK and Ireland, as a hub of English speakers who can then translate games outwards, there's such an opportunity here for us. And at the early stages of an industry body, all of those early wins in terms of creating the standard things that you've talked about in terms of the data would be amazing. When we were doing the second edition of Dark Deeds, I work in
Yeah.
a compliance role in my day-to-day job. And so I was kind of doing my own research about the choking hazard marks on the back, what needed to be on the game. And for us as a company, that was great having me on board, because I was able to say, I'm in the banking industry, it's highly regulated. I know how important the records, not just doing it right on the back, but proving the discussions we had as a business about why we believe that this game, is suitable only for 14 plus, and you have to have certain things on the back. Having that out there, specific to the tabletop industry, invaluable, such a time saver for people, rather than me having to go out, do the research, relate it back to the tabletop games industry. So I think it's the perfect time, brilliant idea, absolutely in support of it. Let's hope the top tier is not £88,000.
I was going to say, your invoice is in the post. I see companies not just asking the same questions that I was asking when I set up Hogshead in the mid-90s, but making the same mistakes that I'd made setting up Hogshead in the 90s, partly because of, and it's an unpleasant subject to touch on, and I can't talk too much about it because I certainly can't name names. There are unscrupulous practitioners within the industry whose business model is take the rubes for a ride. And the trouble, an industry body cannot stand up and go, do not do business with these people, but it can stand up and go, oh, I hear you're talking to these people. Maybe you should talk to these people who did business with them, and what their experience was like.
Oh, absolutely. And even in terms of not necessarily unscrupulous companies, but some of the big companies that are used to provide a business model in the modern business model. So I'm thinking Kickstarter, I'm thinking Patreon, those kind of models, having people to talk to who've done it, who know what a good structure is, who know what the pitfalls are, who can give you advice that's specific to this industry. Again, just something that was going to be so useful for people, especially, newer entrants into the industry.
Yes, completely. And it's not all about helping new companies, but, I remember from Hogshead, 7-8 years in, there were still questions I would have about, I ought to know how to do this, but this question has never come up before, and I don't really know who. Actually, I did know who to ask, because we were sharing an office with Pro Fantasy Software, who were also Pelgrane Publishing at the time. It was, I'll go next door and ask Simon. And then often, Simon, oh, that's a good question. Who do we ask now? So to just have that bank of knowledge. We're very bad on skills transfer. We're very bad on passing on the accumulated knowledge. And we are, sadly, at an age where the great old figures of the industry, the people who set it up, are getting old or dying off. And if there's a way of banking that knowledge, I mean, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson did Dice Men, their book about the early days of Games Workshop. There's Talking Miniatures, which is the 2-volume set of interviews with people who were mostly prevalent at Games Workshop during the Brian Ansell years in Nottingham. But beyond that, and those are not business books, those are not, studying the business case. There's very little in the way of numbers and figures. And okay, well, what is it actually turning over at that point? When you say that, turnover shot up, what do you actually mean? I have to say, Talking Miniatures, there are fantastic anecdotes in that book, absolutely brilliant stories. And it's very badly edited. There's an awful lot of stuff where, someone will reel off this brilliant anecdote, and Robin Dews, who was the editor of White Dwarf and it's co-editor of this, it's Alan Merritt as well. Is it Alan Merritt? I can't remember. It's been a long weekend already. Anyway, but Robin will say, oh, what year was this? When did that happen? And the interviewee goes, oh, I don't remember. And they just leave it there. It's in the text. They don't bother editing it out. It's genuinely unhelpful.
A shout out to, is it Plies Forever, or Plus, is it Welsh? 1974. Hello, first time viewer here. Shout out to you. Thanks for joining us. We're talking about building a game trade association for the UK and Ireland with James Wallis today. Just your point about turnover and trends. What people may not realise is that's really useful as a not just a new business, but as an existing business, unlocking funding. So if you're unlocking
Yes.
funding from a private organization like a bank, they want to know they don't just want to know your turnover as a business. They want to know the business, the sector in which you're in. And they might not be very experienced in the tabletop games industry. There's a lot of misconceptions about it being a hobby rather than a business. So that
for many people in it, it is a hobby,
people,
let's be honest.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so that kind of data is just so valuable for unlocking funding for, as I said, from private organizations, but also things like Creative Scotland, which is where we are, and the equivalent in England, Wales, and Ireland. So that kind of data is going to be great for companies and individuals who are hobbyists and are looking to turn it into a professional long-term proposition. It's going to be great for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of this, my impetus on this, on providing the data in particular, I'm sure he won't mind me talking about this, came from Chris at Modiphius Games.
Absolutely.
Amazing business head, has built an amazing organization. I think he was saying they've got like 70 or 80 members of staff now.
Yeah, so Chris and Modiphius is the partner for Dark Deeds second edition. So we work really closely with them, a really great company and a great guy to work with.
Oh yeah. And they do lovely work as well. I don't know if you've seen their Mass Effect game, but that's a nice game. That's a nice piece of work. Lovely. I mean, the game is great, but the minis are great, and the presentation, it's just really, really nice piece of work. As an example of what the British industry can do, although it was designed by Eric Lang, and I forget his co-designer because
long COVID.
Because long COVID, basically. The analogy I use, the information is in there. It's like ordering a book at the British Library. Sometimes it's right there on the shelf, and sometimes it's 3 weeks. Just takes a while to. Usually about half an hour's time, the information will filter through, and I'll go, oh, it was Anyway, not there yet. But yes, so there's a business case if you are in the industry, rather than, I have nothing against people running hobby companies. That is where an awful lot of the industry starts out. But if you are taking it seriously, you want to make a living out of it, if you want to go to the bank and get a loan to, hire a warehouse or pay for a big print run or pay for some advertising or get a license, then yes, the first thing they're going to say, unless you happen to hit a bank manager who's a gamer, they're going to say, tell me about your industry.
Absolutely.
And, pointing at Games Workshop only goes so far, because I don't know if you've done an episode since the beginning of December. Games Workshop is now a FTSE 100 company.
Yeah, we haven't actually. They came into the FTSE 100 during our break, so we haven't done it. And Darker Days Radio, Chris, who's a great friend of the Rookery as well, a feathered friend. I know because we've talked about it that you've dug into the GW shareholder reports, and they are really interesting. And I've done the same because I'm genuinely fascinated about how they keep the spirit of the hobby while also having all the responsibilities of being a company that has a responsibility enshrined in law to shareholders. Fascinating. But, remember GW now, they're in the FTSE 100, but they didn't start there. They started in the same place that so many hobby games companies do. So, a really great British success story.
Three enthusiastic gamers who'd known each other from school and were mad for it. Just happened to be at the right. Well, they started off doing wooden boards for classic games, doing Owari boards or Mancala boards, and then they happened to discover Dungeons and Dragons, and they happened to write to Gary Gygax, I believe, who sent them a copy of the game for review. They went, "This is brilliant. We can sell this through our fledgling tiny little company." They ordered 6 copies. 6 copies, and on the back of that we're giving the exclusive distribution rights for the whole of Europe for 3 years. But if you don't ask, you're never going to forget that chance. So what started as a hobby company very quickly was earning them a living. And I mean, Ian and Steve sold out for
sorry, only go, James.
Ian and Steve sold out, I think, for £10 million at the end of the 80s. No. I mean,
I can't recall.
It's complicated because the figures are you get different reports from conflicting sources. And I've tried to get a straight answer out of Ian about it, and he's a bit cagey. But they sold for 10 million Tom Kirby led a which I think was about the value of the management buyout that Tom Kirby led in 91, and then he floated the company in 94 at a valuation of 32 million, which, you know, for a hobby games company is considerable. Within about 4 years, it was worth 100 million, and everyone was going, "Oh my lord, this is amazing!" It is now worth £4.5 billion. Games Workshop is worth more than ITV. It's worth more than Manchester United. It is worth more than Greg's.
Wow.
Well, I mean, that is something. To be able to say you're worth more than Greg's in this country is quite an achievement, I would say, for the gaming industry.
And I imagine anybody watching this who's not in the UK has no idea what we're talking about.
I mean, Greg's sells licensed clothes in like Primark and like high street places. So, you know, do you know, the interesting thing about Games Workshop, I know this isn't a stream about Games Workshop, but it's that they haven't done that crossover into, they haven't sold their licensing to those kind of organizations. It hasn't happened yet. I think it probably will.
Not yet.
I think Uniqlo might be the start. If you go into Uniqlo, you see a lot of like anime and kind of nerddom alongside just general fashion brands. Watch Uniqlo space. That's where I would go.
This T-shirt you can just see under here. That is a Uniqlo Animal Crossing T-shirt.
Yeah.
They do
if
great
they
stuff.
Don't do stuff with Uniqlo, they're totally missing a trick. You heard it here first. Games Workshop, get on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff they do is Japanese. They do kind of obscure manga and cult manga. But yeah, Uniqlo would be the right kind of company. I suspect it will be the Amazon series, assuming it's not a disaster, that catapults them into mainstream awareness, because they've been teetering on the edge of that. You know, there are vinyl toys, and you can buy plush Space Marines, I believe, possibly unofficial ones.
You can, they're on like, obviously you can buy like their merch now from Warhammer stores, but you can also, is it Merchoid? Is that the one? I think that's the main one that's got GW stuff now. And I think that will only explode. Right, let us go to, there was a question that came in the chat, which I would just like to come in. So there's 2 questions from Shadition. One, why did you decide to cover the UK and Ireland? They both face quite different challenge. And also, how will you bridge the gulf between the regulation in those 2 countries?
Okay, I mean, we're not about evening out the stuff. We're not about treading on other people's toes. We're about filling in the blanks. There are more things that bring us together, the UK and Ireland, that is. Incidentally, I use UK and Ireland and GB and Ireland interchangeably. They represent different things, but in terms of the landmass that covers, that's the same area. Originally, it was to make the acronym work. But actually, the fact that we're producing English language games on this side of the Atlantic rather than the American side of the Atlantic. I can't remember if my screen is mirrored at the moment. And that is the things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us. And there may well be opportunities in those divisions, using Ireland perhaps as a gateway into Europe, or using partnerships with Irish companies as a way to get EU badges or EU approvals on stuff designed in the UK. The Irish scene is much, much smaller than the GB scene. But at the same time, there's some really, really interesting companies doing stuff. Cubicle 7, of course, is based out in Dublin these days. Pelgrane Press is co-owned by Kat Tobin, who's in Bantry over on the West Coast. And then there's fantastic freelancers like Gar Hanrahan. But there's other companies that we never come across because they're having problems getting their stuff into the UK, because they're not, there's the UK EU thing these days. There are opportunities there. I think there's more opportunities and potential there. Also, there's a lot that the UK scene can learn from the Irish scene, the Irish convention scene. Irish conventions are some of the best I've ever been to in the world. Just one tiny thing, and this has slightly died away now, but in the 90s and early 2000s, mid 2000s, in fact, charity auctions at Irish conventions were raising tens of thousands of euros. Small conventions were raising like 40 or 50 euros per attendee. And this was all going to charity, which would get a write-up in the local paper. This games event, these people playing D&D have made a ton of money for this local good cause. And that does amazing things for the perception of gaming in the local area. And it feeds back. And, people try the games, or people are interested in the games, or at least they're not negative about the games because they know the games are a force for good. There's a lot we can learn from that. And just the way the cons are organized, they're very much fan generated, often university groups. WarpCon, as we speak, WarpCon at University College Cork is going on right now. They can afford to fly John Kovalik over from America as a special guest. Quite often they've had 2 American guests over. It does fantastic things for the profile of of the Irish games industry, and also the inspiration for young companies starting up over there, being able to talk to American games designers and games publishers. Does a lot.
Yeah, so Police Forever, my problem is the UK is not in the EU, so in Denmark, all product is costing 24 pund extra in taxes, so it's expensive to buy from small companies. Sorry, that was Norwegian, not Danish, so I do apologise for that butchering of your neighbour's language, not even your own language. So yeah, well, tell us about it. I mean, I mentioned Norway because obviously Norway has is not in the EU, but has a trade relationship with the EU that is better than the UK's trade relationship with the EU now.
Not hard.
I think leaving the EU, we have made no secret in the Rookery that we think it's one of the worst decisions that the UK collectively has ever made. And certainly, James, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I feel you said just earlier, in the last kind of section, that the connection with Ireland might go some way to mitigating that if we could come to some sort of cross-border agreements between British and Irish companies.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole thing, these product safety warnings that need to be on products now, you need to essentially have an agent within the EU that will vouch for, that is associated with your product. And a number of companies have set up. I'm aware of some in Spain and in Italy. I think there's another one in France for the games industry that will do this. And it's kind of a proxy. It's a way of getting around it. Why is there not one in Ireland? There should be. A massive opportunity there. So that kind of thing. I agree. It's such a small bit of water that separates us from the EU, and it is so ridiculous that it has become such a massive barrier to small companies. The level of paperwork required. I mentioned I was at Essenspiel, the big, which if you don't know it, it's the biggest tabletop games convention in the world. It's in Essen in Germany every October. Over 200,000 people last year. It's vast. It's genuinely extraordinary. And of course, British and Irish companies go over for that. And the number of people, and I was there talking about Big Table, and the number of companies who went, yes, we need a full explanation of EU import regulations and German VAT, because we went to our local bloke and he told us what to do and he was wrong. And I ended up sitting on the floor of a German customs office until 9 o'clock last night, filling out paperwork for every single product line I'm bringing into the show. It's a nightmare. And yeah, large companies, of course, can do it. And the government doesn't talk to small companies, it only talks to large companies because that's the nature of government. And despite the fact that James Cleverly, the senior Tory MP, is a 40k player.
Yeah, he is.
But then of course Workshop is a huge company. I doubt he's buying stuff from Bad Squiddo Games or any other of the lovely smaller manufacturers.
My little story about Essenspiel is a friend of mine is 50 this year, and as a present, he's been gifted a trip to Essen, and to surprise him, someone made up like tickets for him, so like he had something to open, so like travel tickets, lovely. And the travel tickets were for an airship. Like a dirigible airship. And so he actually thought he was going in an airship because this person did such a good job of making the tickets. And when I saw it, I was like, are you also time traveling to 1935? And he was like, no, there must be an airship now. And so then our other friend informed both of us that no, that was just the template he had used. He's going on either a train or a plane like a normal human from 2025. I was devastated. I was like, you're so lucky to be going on an airship.
Yeah, that's amazing.
To go to Germany.
The problem with running I mean, I could see with taking an airship to Essen, but bringing it back, the weight of the games that everyone is bringing back with them, bumping along about 3 meters off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's
still
not
be
going
faster
by
than the
airship.
trains. Yeah.
Sadly, it turns out. So, Martine, let's get back to a question from Martine, who pre-submitted questions on our Discord server. So how do you intend to get companies to sign up? What's the strategy?
The strategy is basically be present, be visible, and hopefully get. We'll be doing things like monthly webinars with industry leaders talking about, the state of the industry for a start, what's going on, what the trends are. Notable retailers, notable manufacturers, notable distributors, just, giving the benefit of their wisdom. People that you're aware of within the industry, but you've never actually had a chance to hear them speak. Or if you have, they're pushing product, they're doing. A lot of the communication that happens within the games industry is B2C. It's people trying to sell games to customers. There's very little B2B communication, business to business communication. So business to business webinars. We'll be present at UK Games Expo. We'll have a booth. We'll actually have our first annual general meeting at UK Games Expo, which assumes we will launch before then, which depends entirely on us being able to get a bank account, which apparently may take Lindsay, I may need to talk to you about this.
Yeah,
because we'll be a non-profit. I should say the company is a non-profit. It will be run by its board of directors. I will be on the board, but I will be running the executive, which is the body that carries out what the board decides. The board will be elected by the membership.
Yeah, so hit me up afterwards. So I both have experience in banking. I also have experience as a treasurer, a convener, a chair of multiple non-profit organizations, as a board member, and my day job is in governance and compliance. So I'm happy to provide advice for free to the organization on, I don't know, corporate governance, non-profit governance, because it's
amazing.
Governance, risk management, audit is a big passion of mine, and gaming is the other passion of mine. So I would never charge an organization like this one for my services, just to be clear.
But I have the, my credo since the Hogshead days is if you're doing work for us, you get paid. We pay people what they're worth.
Well, as a non-profit organization, it is entirely within my rights to tell you that I'd rather not pay the tax on what I'm earning. I will give you my time for free.
I appreciate that greatly. But yeah, I mean, the other way of getting companies to sign up is basically showing people that we're doing a good job for them and for the industry as a whole. So, demonstrating that, putting our money where our mouth is. There will be, the main hub of the company will be an online dedicated members only forum. There'll be forum spaces for online discussions, but also a library of documentation, online webinars, regular talks, industry meetups, in-person meetups, events at large games conventions. And we hope further on down the line, actual lobbying government and other organizations to get video game development gets tax breaks in the UK. Yeah. Why doesn't board game development?
Absolutely.
Like I say, £750 million quid turnover. We're doing good things for the economy. Help us out. Don't just whack more VAT on us.
And as you're a UK association, obviously Scotland has a devolved parliament that often takes evidence in different forums and in different ways. And because Scotland's a smaller country, I mean, I've given evidence in the Scottish Parliament on the effects on poverty, on parents and education and stuff. Like, it feels much more of a direct democracy because of that. But I think there'll probably be a real appetite in Scotland for elected representatives to hear about it, to support it, especially with the hub of the video games industry. Being up in Dundee, it's a real of interest to the Scottish elected representatives, especially in those areas. You know, it could be a great job creator. We've been supporting, as my young people are there, a Women in Games Society at Abertay that they've just set up. And many years ago, I used to run a gender network, a women's network in a FTSE 100 bank before I moved to my new bank. And Kat from Pelgrane Press and I, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, we've had a conversation, I would say, do you know, about a decade ago now, about a Women in Games challenges and an industry body for women in the tabletop gaming industry. So what I was quite interested to hear about is where does, and I've consciously picked a phrase that is quite controversial right now, but where does diversity, equity and inclusion fit in the priorities of Big Table?
Okay, well, the first thing I need to say is I am not Big Table. Big Table is not me. My opinions are irrelevant. I will be running the executive. This is a decision for the board to make, and the board will be setting policy. At the same time, games are for everyone. And if you've got an industry that is saying our products are for everyone, then you can't say, oh, but only certain people are qualified to make them, or certain people are better at making them, or, you know, or I'll talk to this group of people, but not that group of people. That's frankly ridiculous. The other thing, of course, is DEI is just the latest version of woke. It's the latest version of politically correct. It is a phrase the right uses to bash everything they don't like about the left, in particular, the sense that everyone is equal. And everyone deserves a fair crack of the whip. But you look at the diversity in the industry at the moment, and I think the UK and Irish industry is particularly strong on that. The number of brilliant, you know, companies coming or products coming out from trans creators in particular. I should make it clear that, you know, this is not, when I say tabletop industry, I don't mean role play in particular. It's the whole thing. It's board games, card games, role-playing games, miniatures games, war games, family games, even traditional games as well. We want to talk to the chess people. We want to, you know, get them on board. That's a big market. How big? I couldn't tell you. No one's collating the data.
We don't know the data.
But yes, we're all selling the same idea to the same people. You know, and the benefits of games are the same whether you're rolling polyhedrals or moving your rook. It's all good stuff. So yes, so certainly I will be pushing for the committee. The central board will set up kind of subcommittees. Individual board members will, I think, take responsibility for committees covering certain areas, and whether that's retail or LGBTQ, great.
Up to the board,
it's completely up to the board and the members and how much time they've got.
I think for me, the biggest myth about DEI that's currently being peddled is it somehow lowers standards, where actually, if you have an excellent organization that follows a code of ethics, that has great corporate governance, then diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of that organization being open to everyone. It's part of breaking down barriers in an industry to ensure that whoever you are, there is a meritocracy. It's not the opposite of a meritocracy. It is, in essence, you know, supporting the idea of a meritocracy. And when I was, you know, leading the women's network, we would often get people, you know, come and talk to us, men in the banking industry who'd say like, well, where's my network? And my glib response was, your network is the bank. It was formed in 1707 or 1728, 1727, I think. But my follow-up to that was, you shouldn't confuse equity isn't for, and diversity inclusion isn't for one type of person. It's to ensure that barriers are broken for everyone. And that barrier for you as a man in the banking industry might be that you don't get the same level of support to go off and have parental leave as a woman does. So financially, your family has to choose the gender stereotype of the woman looking after the children, even if you as a family wanted to choose a different option. For you as a man, that might mean that because the stereotype that's negatively associated with you and women is talking about emotions, that might mean for you as a man, you have a really difficult time processing grief that comes into your life, processing mental health issues and talking about it because you're worried about the stigma. And so in a way, you know, gender stereotypes, they hurt women, they hurt men, they kill men. You know, men, although they don't kill themselves, attempt to kill themselves at higher rates, they succeed in it as higher rates. And that's been one of the biggest passion projects of my career, is helping people understand that gender equality is about making a better society for everyone. And that includes all the men in it, as well as all the women and all the non-binary people. So yeah, sorry, rant over.
And the one we didn't talk about, I mean, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm in conventional terms unemployable. There are very few companies that would take a risk on somebody my age, because, you know, they expect that in less than 10 years I'm going to be retiring. I'm not. I'm going to work till I drop, because I'm in games and I love it. But at the same time, ageism is one of those specters that we do not talk. And it's an aging market, it's an aging audience, and an aging industry to a large extent. And we need to have conversations about that. So yes, it's absolutely, you know, games are for everyone, and that includes the games industry. And it's got so much. I mean, I've been kicking around the industry since I was at school. Literally, I started my first fanzine just after my O-levels. And the industry, certainly Games Fair, the first residential convention, Games Day back in the early 80s, was white faces as far as you could see. Almost all of them male, and occasionally a long-suffering girlfriend or mum. And there were female players, but very, very few of them. And it's so much better now. And it can only get better. There's still, you wander around Expo and go, oh my God, this is amazing. There is a dearth of particular non-white faces. There are some, there are not nearly enough.
When I first...
Sorry. Oh, no, actually, just let me just finish this.
I'll let you finish. Yeah.
Particularly given that it's in Birmingham, or just outside Birmingham.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
one of the hubs of the Southeast Asian diaspora. You know, there's an uprisen. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Middle class of non-white people in the Birmingham and the Black Country and that whole area. And they're not into hobby games, or at least they're not coming to hobby games events. And this is something that we as an industry should look at, because that's, you know, that's not racism. That's an opportunity. That's, you know, why are we not appealing to this market? I don't have the answers, but I know we need to ask the questions.
I feel even more now. I think we became a bit complacent about the relentless engine of progress supporting anti-racism, gender equality. And I feel like in the past few years, we've started to go back a bit as strong men politics. And I don't necessarily mean men, but I mean that strong men as the term have kind of had an uplift. And I saw a really upsetting advert for, I think it wasn't Siri, was it, Andy? I told you the other day. Who was it? Oh, the Ring doorbell now has a Scottish female voice, but the picture of she was Glaswegian, but her skin happened to be brown. More than likely, third generation diaspora, a Scottish, if not more Scottish than me, and welcome to the World Forge people who've just joined us. We're talking with James Wallis about building a games trade association for the UK and Ireland at the moment. And it was really upsetting comments on there about, that's not a Scottish face. It absolutely is a Scottish face, just as it is a Brummie face to be brown. And I really felt that I needed... you know, if you look to the past and you think of the Freedom Riders, the white people that were supporting Black civil rights, everyone thinks that they would have been one of those people. Everyone thinks they would have been anti-Nazi, but actually the reality is that was the minority, because it was costly to stand up. Like right now, we have a privilege that it's not costly and dangerous for us to stand up and support people of color, to support trans people, in this country at the moment. And if we don't stand up and support minorities, it will become costly, not just, you know, for us, but it will also become more dangerous for those people. So I'm really glad you raised the Birmingham point, because it's so topical and so important.
No, absolutely. I mean, I live in Tooting in South London. I'm used to walking down Tooting High Street and feeling like I'm in a minority. And good, because I grew up in Suffolk, which is the only time you saw a non-white face in Suffolk in the 1970s is they were American airmen from one of the American air bases. And you know, it's great to be jarred out of your cultural frames and references and remember that the world is much bigger and much more diverse and richer for it. The most exciting, there are two RPGs I'm really excited for to come out. There's a thing called Mapamundi, which is great but not terribly relevant to this. But there's also a game that I saw at UK Games Expo. It's in draft. It's not ready for launch, and I had some comments about it. It's called Bludgeon, which is a great name. And it's based on Southeast Asian, particularly Indian, not just mythology, but pop culture mythology. And it's like a blast of fresh air. It's like, where has this stuff been? This is the stuff that Gygax didn't rip off for the Monster Manual. It's wonderful. There's a freshness and, just this different culture to it, somewhere to explore and adventure and understand a little bit more of, perhaps not necessarily because you're rolling dice to kill it for experience points, but it's just games that come in from different points of view teach us so much, not just about games but about one of the things about role-playing is that the reason that role-playing games are used in therapy, we learn about ourselves through the act of that kind of imaginative play.
Can I make just
I have a manifesto.
Can I make a little plug on that, actually? Not next week, but the week after on Inside the Rookery, we'll be welcoming Tanya Floker, who's a local indie games designer. And we're going to be talking about Tanya's current game that's on Kickstarter, and I will pop a link into the chat, which is called Mum Chums, which is an RPG, a slice of life RPG about people who look after young people. And I just think that's lovely. It's so different from the Kill It for XP style of RPG. So
absolutely,
2 weeks' time, do join us.
And Darker Days Radio is talking. I actually did some outreach for national numeracy in my role as a software engineer at S&P Global, and I did also talk a lot about my hobby freelance work. A lot of fun since the school in Sheffield was in a less privileged area. I think in a lot of the big industry companies now, the focus is really on intersectionality, but specifically intersectionality of socioeconomic background with some other minority aspects, because and I think that will be really interesting for a trade association like this, which is supporting entrepreneurs, people who are building their own business. Because one of the things that stops people from starting their own business is generational wealth and not having a safety net to support you. So it's much easier to not own the means of production and to join a safe corporate job, a service job, when you don't have that generational wealth behind you. And it's a big priority for the UK government, for the banking sector, to really support different kinds of people into owning their own businesses, running their own businesses, being the creatives, but making money from their own creative genius in a way that in the past they wouldn't have been able to do. So again, a really timely kind of association to be starting.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know what else to add to that. Except I didn't know you knew Tanya, because I didn't know that she was in Edinburgh. For some reason I thought she was over in America, but shows what I know.
So Second Time Samurai, I love Tanya's SLA industry stuff, Scottish shout out. And here's the Kickstarter, which is in the comments as well, so you can copy and paste it from there. Right, let's have a look at my next question. Oh yeah, here's one. I've heard you've become involved in Seed Talk, so can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I got this call out of the blue before Christmas, going, do you know anything about the history of Games Workshop? And I went, yeah. And they went, could you do a lecture on it? And I went, probably. They went, how much notice would you need? I went, well, I could probably wing it if you want it this afternoon, but I'd like a bit. Anyway, Seed Talks, for it was they, are a company that apparently, if you're on Instagram, that you've probably seen their adverts. They do lectures, some of them online, some of them in person, and workshops and stuff. A lot of it's around mindfulness and wellness and that kind of stuff, but they're branching out and they're doing more kind of geek and alt culture stuff like psychedelics, but also proper geekery stuff. The great Helen McCarthy is doing lectures for them on the art of Studio Ghibli. There's someone whose name I can't remember doing stuff on Tolkien, and now I'm doing lectures on the history of Games Workshop, or the history of Warhammer specifically. I did one, actually, it was the 4th of December. It was the day that Games Workshop entered the FTSE 100 index, nice. The list of the one. It was extraordinary because it was literally, nice. It's after the index closes at 4 or 5 o'clock. So I was checking my phone. Are they in? Are they in? Yes. So fantastic to start off with a slide going Games Workshop worth £4.5 billion, you know, bigger than Aston Martin, bigger than Manchester United, bigger than Greggs, bigger than...
I still can't go over bigger than Greggs as a benchmark. It's amazing.
But it gave me a chance to really... I've written on the history of Games Workshop before. There's an MIT Press book called Zones of Control, which is like the history of wargaming. And it's an amazing... If you're into wargaming, Zones of Control is a fantastic read. It's everybody who's anybody in the field that wrote for it, and me and Ian Starrick wrote the Games Workshop. We wrote the Games Workshop bit, but that kind of gave me a chance to flesh out a chunk of the Games Workshop history. But that was like 8 or 9 years ago. So going back to it, and there's so many great stories in there, and just delving into the history and the prehistory of the games themselves, because obviously I talk about Warhammer, but 40k, Age of Sigmar, blowing up the old world and what that meant, and some of the side games as well. I could get a chance to digress into like Gorka Morka. Did Gorka Morka really almost sink Games Workshop in 1997, like excited internet commentators say? No, it did not. It caused a minor blip in the cash flow and in the share price, but most of that was actually due to the cost overruns in the move to the new office in Lenton.
And we know firsthand it sold very well in Edinburgh, because Andy Law and I sold a lot of copies of it. So.
Yeah. I love Gorka Morka. I love the orcs generally. I don't play the tabletop Warhammer games, but if I did, I would play orcs. And Gorka Morka, it's Workshop's third crack at trying to make a tabletop racing game, of a violent racing game, work. There was Battle Cars by British Steve Jackson. Just confusing because American Steve Jackson had already done Car Wars, so British Steve Jackson does Battle.
What are the chances of that?
I know.
Well, I think they knew each other. I think they were working together on other projects. So they did that, and then they did Dark Future in the early 90s or even the late 80s, which was a Richard Halliwell who'd done Space Hulk and was one of the instrumental designers on Games Workshop, on the early Workshops, up particularly the original Warhammer. Great designer. Dark Future does not really work.
And Dark Future has the novel series associated with it.
Yeah.
By Jack Yeovil, the pen name of Kim Newman, the famous
and a bunch of others.
Yeah, and the novels are better than the game is, but
the novels are fantastic. I can rant and rant about this. The Dark Future game started life as a cyberpunk RPG in the days when Workshop was still doing RPGs. Mark Gascoigne, who'd done the Judge Dredd RPG, was putting this thing together because it was the mid-late 80s, and cyberpunk as a literary form was really hot, but had not cracked, hadn't even broken out into comics, let alone movies at that point. And he was doing what was going to be the first cyberpunk game, and then Workshop moved away from role play and it was kind of shelved, and then Halliwell came in and co-opted bits of it. So the background is there are the gated cities, the basically walled cities, which are all shiny tech and cyberpunky stuff, which does not appear in Dark Future, the game as published. And then everything else is a blasted wasteland. And you get highway mayhem and Mad Max style car combat, which is what the game was about, because Workshop by that point had transitioned to, we are a miniatures company that publishes games that support the miniatures line. It wasn't a big hit. It's not great. The rules needed another go over or two. And it's kind of been left to perish. But the novels are cracking. In particular, the Jack Yeovil ones. What are the Demon Download? What's the Comeback Tour? Comeback Tour is my personal, which is the one in which, because it's Earth history, but it's an alt history. The British invasion of the USA from British musical acts in the 1960s was led in this alt future, not by the Beatles, but by Ken Dodd.
Elvis is alive in the in those novels, isn't he? Yeah.
Elvis is alive. Elvis. The idea is that Elvis got started off, career is setting up marvelously, is drafted into the army, which happened. Decides he likes the army and stays in the army, and then gets out at some point in the 1980s and becomes a mercenary. And is plagued by occasional nightmares of being fat and sweaty on a stage somewhere, mumbling lyrics he can't remember. It's fun, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for that book, because it's mostly there's a huge chunk set at Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy, and you've got the ghosts of Astra. It's mad as hell, brilliant. Absolutely,
and I seem to recall that much like he also wrote an alternative Victorian novel, didn't he? Something Rains.
There's the Anno Dracula stuff, in which I believe Dracula marries Queen Victoria.
Exactly,
is the start point for that timeline.
And of course wrote Genevieve Undead and all and those series. And when you look at them, there are characters that exist in all three of them. And so in Jack Yoval's world, Kim Newman's world, the Warhammer world is in our universe, is an alternative version, and arguably the Demon Download and that series are the precursor to 40k. That's where the Emperor rose in Nottingham in that universe. So that's where to go if you want to read the very original, the origin story of 40k.
Yeah, he did a solo game book as well. Not a fighting fantasy or anything like that. It's called Life's Lottery. It came out in, I think, 2000 and did get reprinted. But the idea, it starts off, you are, I think, 6 or 7 years old on your first day at school, and a bunch of bigger boys come up to you in the playground and ask who your favorite man from U.N.C.L.E. is. Is it Napoleon Solo or Ilya Kuryakin? And upon that decision rests the direction of the rest of your life. It's great. And the idea is you read through it multiple times. In fact, there's a mechanic for that. It's not mechanically driven, but in some timelines you can become prime minister. In others, you end up dead in a ditch. It's fantastically imaginative and clever. Just one of the great explorations of what the fighting of the solo game book form can do.
Because that would have been my worst nightmare as a kid, because we didn't have a television growing up, and it was a constant and being poor when I was growing up was like one of the worst things you could be perceived to be, and so not having a television was associated with poverty. And so my brother and I wouldn't have known. I didn't even know who the man from U.N.C.L.E. was. Got a big gap in my pop culture from that era. And my brother and I used to listen on the bus to other people talk about popular TV shows so we could fake it at school later in the day as though we had watched those shows. So that's my early spy training.
That's
it
amazing.
Was all, and it's the kind of, we all have different trauma. I mean, as trauma goes, that's a pretty privileged trauma to have. But genuinely, the things that as a child for you are normal, that are nobody else's childhood, and I think that's a fascinating, so I think that's a really amazing way to start something at age 6 with the bigger boys coming up and asking you your favorite man from U.N.C.L.E. with it. It's so niche. It
is great, but no, I'm not going to get into my background and things that were normal for me at school and stuff. I won't even start, not least because it will colour your opinion of me as soon as you work out where I was at school, which doesn't.
Well,
take
I know
very
where
long.
you were at school, and it hasn't coloured my opinion of you, James.
I'm quite careful that I let people get to know me, and then it's I was at school with 2 prime ministers, 2 future prime ministers. There you go. Yes, and knew both of them and did A-level economics with one of them. People frantically Googling now.
So we've got a minute left, so we'll just do a quick summary. So we have talked about a couple of things. Here's one that we didn't talk about, so just do it very quickly. Martin asked, do you think there'll be any issues with games companies sharing information with you so you can provide a better service?
No, I mean, we'll be very careful on protected and privileged information and copy, sharing of any of that kind of data. Any information we get on sales and stuff will either be voluntarily surrendered in personal information or all that stuff. We are very aware of the law and we'll be following it to the letter. But yeah, it's, I'm aware that we will have to prove our merits. And, I hope my reputation goes ahead of me in the industry as somebody who mostly delivers what they say they're going to. So yeah, it's, I'm not expecting people to just throw money at us going, this sounds like a good idea. This is not Kickstarter. You don't back a Kickstarter project because it sounds like a good idea. You back it because you want to see the finished thing and they've convinced you that they can deliver it. It's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest risks for a trade association for consumers is price fixing. But again, a good governance structure, training and awareness of that means that everybody operates with the duty to consumers in mind.
Yeah.
And that would be part of the board's responsibility to ensure the management of risks like that in any non-profit organization. So
actually, if I can just jump back for one moment, and I'm aware we're almost out of time. There was a question earlier on about the high price of British and Irish produced games in mainland Europe. I think one of the things that Big Table can do is potentially, because nobody wants their games to be overpriced, to be priced at a level where people can't afford them. In fact, our Games Workshop has spent decades working out exactly what the optimum price is that people are prepared to pay, not and not go over that. That's a different topic. But in terms of things like ganging print jobs, if small companies can work with a single printer to combine their printers, if you're doing a game and it's only got 30 cards in it, work with another game that's only doing that only needs 25 cards, because that way you'll print them all on the same sheet and you will slice your costs in half, literally. And this is all doable. Likewise, shipments. The price of shipping, particularly from China, where 95% of the world's board games are made these days, exploded during lockdown. This is part of what I was doing at Asmodee. We used to pay, when I joined the company, we were paying $2,500–3,000 for a 40-foot container. By the time I left, we were paying $19,000 for the same container. And those prices are expensive. But if you can coordinate your loads so that you're not just booking one container, it's full of stuff from companion companies, and possibly they're all going to go to the same warehouse at the other end, the same fulfillment house. That's a massive potential saving in cost and efficiency as well, because customs documents are then a lot simpler as well. There are huge opportunities that that large companies get all the time and smaller companies don't. And the vast majority of companies in the games industry in the UK are small companies. Even someone like Modifius, we say 70, 80 people. In business terms, that's a small company. And ultimately we want, what we're here to do is not to play favorites or anything. We want to create fertile soil so that everyone can grow.
Absolutely.
That's what
a rising tide lifts all boats. There we go.
Exactly. Yes, but I was trying to stay away from anything that might remind people about the English Channel.
Oh well, sorry.
And all the problems about it. We're online. We have a very preparatory website that talks a little bit about what we're doing. Bigtable.games. You can contact me.
We've got that here. It's in the comments.
Fantastic. James at bigtable.games. If you want to contact me directly, I'm very happy to talk. We're also on Blue Sky, bigtable.games, Facebook, although I'm not looking at Facebook very much these days. And I've no idea if we have a presence on Twitter, and I don't frankly care. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, James. That's been really interesting to hear about the latest venture. I'm going to be going and signing up to make sure I get kept up to date with this. I'm really excited to be involved with it as it goes forward. And thank you for sharing your Saturday night with us as always. You are
always a pleasure. The Rookery is like a second home, third home. My home in Scotland.
You're home in Scotland, yeah. Well, you're very welcome to return. And so thank you, as always, to all our patrons who allow us to continue to deliver Inside the Rookery, an inside look at the gaming industry ad-free. Thank you to our friendly Discord server. Please do join us there. We will be back next week, I suspect, with the Rooks, but watch the Discord server and the patron for news on that. And then we are being joined the week after, Andy, by...
Tanya Floker.
Tanya Floker. So come and join us then. Until the next time, thank you so much. Thank you to James. Thanks, Andy. Thanks to all the audience. We will see you soon. Cuckoo! Cuckoo! Cuckoo!